Let's talk to Noah Hoffman, political correspondent at The Sun. Noah, very good morning to you. You've got the front page this morning, a great front page. It's okay to identify as a llama. This is Ashley Dalton, who I must confess I'd never heard of until yesterday. You might obviously know her better than I do. She also thinks it's okay for women to have a willy, it says here. And basically, she seems to have come from a slightly, shall we say, woke part of the Labour Party to do this job.
Yeah, I mean, wokeness aside, our front page is very funny. It's very striking, and we can all laugh at her ridiculous, absurd statement that one can identify as a Peruvian mammal. But there is a more serious side to this, which is about the protection of women and women's spaces.
Yeah.
Because Ashley Dalton has said multiple times that, you know, that a woman can have a penis. She wants to ban female-only toilets. Now, she's the Minister for Public Health, and this is a huge public health issue.
Right.
So it is, you know, I will definitely join in the laughter about her saying that you can identify as South American wildlife. It is ridiculous and it's funny. But there is a more serious point about the implications that her views have within her role as a public health minister.
Yeah, also, does it not kind of illustrate, if you like, the paucity of talent that Keir Starmer's got? You know, he's got rid of one guy, Andrew Gwynne, who thought it was a good idea to tell pensioners that, you know, he hoped they would die before the next election, who was anti-Semitic in some of the things that he wrote on WhatsApp group. He was racist, he was a pretty nasty piece of work all round. And this is the replacement? I mean, it's hardly a step in the right direction, is it?
No, it's definitely not. And it is a bit surprising because within the new 2024 intake of Labour MPs, there are, you know, I mean, I know you're not Labour's biggest fan, Mike, but there are a crop of individuals who have, you know, pretty sound views. They're much more centrist than some of the more far left wokerati in the party. And there are some rising talent in the midst. You might not see them yet, but they're sort of coming out their shell and learning the ways of Parliament. There were options available. So what really baffles me is why he went for this woman who clearly had a very long history of saying absurd statements, and statements that, quite frankly, Keir Starmer has spent months trying to distance his party from. We've seen him really toughen up his stance on what a woman is. Not that that should even require, you know, practice, but practice he had. Labour sort of worked out its line on this whole issue, and then, you know, they fire one wrong-un and bring in maybe not so much a wrong-un, but someone with just these absurd views that, you know, we look to the US, and Donald Trump has almost won an election on saying, I've had enough of people saying these kinds of things. Why Labour thought this was a good idea is just beyond comprehension.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And he came in and he swept them all aside, hasn't he? He's just going, that's not happening anymore. You're all out. He's locking people out of government buildings, saying, you know, sorry, you know, we're not going to have anybody in here who thinks that DEI is a good idea. And I'm not, I must admit, you may think I'm anti-Labour. I'm not actually. I'm just anti-hypocrisy. You know, I was anti the Tories when they were hypocrites as well. And if I find a good Labour MP, I'll get behind them and support them. You know, John Healey, for me, the Defence Minister, is actually the one guy who has made a decent statement in the House of Commons in the 6 or 7 months that Labour have been in, when he identified the Russian ship that was in the Channel, and he gave them a warning, a very stern warning, and said, we see you, we know what you're doing, you know, cut it out, or else there's going to be a problem. You know, John Healey's the kind of guy that I would get behind and say he's actually a sensible and an authoritative individual, but there's not many of them, I'm afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. But there are some sort of, perhaps you could call them John Healey's in the making, who do exist. They are there. I've met them. So why you would opt for this woman who is encouraging people to take those who identify as a llama seriously over the crop of people who actually are, you know, trying to paint themselves as the serious arm of the Labour Party, or the up-and-coming sort of Blairites who want to be taken very seriously and look more sort of ministerial. Why you would opt for this woman is just very confusing.
Well, I guess when she looks at Angela Rayner as her inspiration, she'll make that connection and go, well, if she can walk around wearing a coat that looks like it's too big for her, as Judith, our voice noter, said, you know, looks like her mother bought it for her, and a pair of brothel creepers to meet the king, I guess, you know, the standards and the bar are pretty low.
Oh, Well, Mike, I'm a girl's girl. I'm not gonna criticize Angela Rayner's fashion choices.
You don't have to agree with me. No, it's fine. Let's talk about Leo McKinstry's column this morning in The Sun on page 12. Labour's cynical and deceitful bid to take on reform. We were just talking about this a little bit with Ryan Saby. You know, reform is the flavour of the month right now. It's top of the polls. It's way far ahead of the Conservatives, now far ahead of, or a little bit further ahead of Labour as well. And basically Leo's saying that this is a bit of a mission which is destined to fail, because they're trying to paint reform as this kind of, you know, crazy far-right organisation full of crazy people and nutters and nutcases, when in fact they're more or less trying now to tell us that their migration policy is going to be identical.
Yeah, so it is a huge mistake for any politician to write off supporters of Nigel Farage or reform as, you know, racist or thick or any sort of other incendiary remark. You could not have a more stupid strategy in trying to win over reform voters than disregarding them as racist or any other insult. These are, you know, hardworking people, patriotic people who are seeing the impact of illegal migration on their society and saying enough is enough. Now, Labour has finally realised that the tactic for winning back these voters, and there is this huge crossover between Labour and Reform voters. In the Venn diagram's actually quite big. Labour has now clocked onto that, and instead of insulting Reform voters, they're actually trying to replicate some of the rhetoric. However, if your strategy for tackling small boats is smashing the gangs, which so far really just has not worked, and you know, that is the expert advice, is that it's a nice idea, but in and of itself, it won't be enough. They aren't going to win over these Reform voters. What the Reform voters will want to see is results. And just having that strategy of tackling the gangs rather than having a deterrent of some description, that's not going to be enough. So they can put out all the ads they want. They can try and replicate Reform rhetoric as much as they want. But at the end of the day, people will be looking at those Home Office statistics that come out weekly, that come out monthly in terms of crossings, and they will make that judgment for themselves.
Yeah, and at the moment, the immigration policy which they're trying to sell us is, you know, perhaps doing better than they thought it would be doing, but it's not quite doing what it should be doing.
Yeah, so it's worth giving Labour some credit where it's due. And what they've really wanted to sort of get out to the public is that there has been a huge spike in deportation flights, over 16,000 people. The party's really keen for that message to get across. But, you know, every day at The Sun, we are keeping an eye on the small boat crossing statistics. They really are not coming down at all. I think we've had already over 1,000 in 2025. So, you know, deportation flights are great, but if those people are just going to be replaced with more people who are coming across the channel, then what is the point? So we're going to have to see some real major changes soon if Labour's sort of metamorphosis into some kind of Reform light or Reform left-wing version is going to work. We're going to have to see better results.
Absolutely. No, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Noah Hoffman, their political correspondent at The Sun. Leo McKinstry's piece in The Sun on page 12 this morning, on the leader page, basically. Labour's cynical and deceitful bid to take on reform. He's not having any of it, and nobody really believes the Labour government is going to have a success on the migration front, do they?